Wonder how much longer before they find us and wipe us out. There's more and more highly sophisticated security programs. Hackers are costing industry billions. The FBI has a whole department now for computer crime. The seed is sown, Bech said, still somewhat in Buddhist mode. Let's go to bed. I'll let you suck my thumb if you beg nicely. You bad bitch, he added, to see if her eyes would darken again. They did. But the sniffers were out there, racing at the speed of light through the transistors, scouring the binary code for alien configurations and rogue algorithms. Now it was Robin who each morning rushed in her inherited terry-cloth robe, on her pink-sided bare feet, down the 2 flights to the ground-floor foyer and seized the Times and scanned its obituary page. The very day after her Trojan horse, detected and killed, failed to respond, there it was. Aldous Cannon, 43, critic, commentator, jumped from the balcony of his apartment on the 48th floor. No pedestrians hurt, but an automobile parked on Sutton Place, severely damaged. Distraught wife, said the writer and radio personality, whose website on the internet was one of the most visited for literary purposes by college students, had seemed preoccupied lately and confessed to sensations of futility. Had always hoped to free up time to write a big novel. In a separate story in Section C, a wry collegial tribute from Christopher Lehman Haupt. Bech and Robin should have felt jubilant. They had planted a flickering wedge of doubt beneath the threshold of consciousness and brought down a wise guy, a media-savvy smartass. But it became clear after their initial mutually congratulatory embrace, there, above the sweating carton of orange juice and the slowly toasting bagels, that they felt sickened, let down, and ashamed. They avoided the sight and touch of each other for the rest of the day, though it was a Saturday. They had planned to go up to the Metropolitan Museum and check out the Ivan Albright show, and then try to get an outdoor table at the Stanhope, in the deliciously crisp September air. But the thought of art in any form sickened them. Sweet icing on dung, thin ice over the abyss. Robin went shopping for black jeans at Barney's and then took a train to visit her parents in Garrison, while Bech, in a stupor like that of a snake digesting a poisonous toad, sat watching 2 Midwestern college football teams batter at each other in a screaming, chanting stadium far west of the Hudson, where life was sunstruck and clean. Robin spent the night with her parents and returned so late on Sunday she must have hoped her lover would be asleep. But he was up, waiting for her, reading. First, some Froissart on the Battle of Crécy. The bodies of 11 princes, 1,200 knights, and about 30,000 common men were found on the field. And then a dip into the little volume of Donne. License my roving hands and let them go, before, behind, between, above, below. Oh, my America, my newfound land. His eyes kept sliding off the page. The day's lonely meal had generated a painful gas in his stomach. His mouth tasted chemically of nothingness, passive consumption, moral insufficiency, the alleged selflessness of the artist. What a crock! All was vanity, a coy dance of veils grotesque in a septuagenarian. Robin's key timidly scratched at the lock and she entered. He met her near the threshold and they gently bumped heads in a show of contrition. They had together known sin. Like playmates who had mischievously destroyed a toy, they slowly repaired their relationship. As Aldi Cannon's wanton but not unusual, John Berryman, Jerzy Kaczynski, self-erasure slipped deeper down into the stack of used newspapers, and the obligatory notes of memorial tribute tinnily, fadingly sounded in the Pen and Authors Guild newsletters, the duo on Crosby Street recovered their dynamism and a fresh will to adventure in the quixotic cause of ridding literary Gotham of villains. Bech bought himself a cape and Robin a mask, a black mask, covering half her tidy white bobbed nose and framing her warm, intricate eyes in a stiff midnight strangeness. It turned him on. He made her wear it during lovemaking. I feel so dirty, she confessed. I feel like one of those corrupted countesses in French pornography. I feel like... oh. Bech was good in bed, but impotent elsewhere. "I can't sit at a desk anymore," he said. "I want to get out and do something," he said. "Ever since Aldi jumped, it's like I've got St. Vitus's dance." "Let's walk up to Washington Square. We'll cruise the remaining bookstores on 8th Street. "They were right, the bastards," Bech fumed. "I have nothing to say. I just wanted to pose, and print was the easiest place for a shy guy. I'm an elderly, useless poseur." Out walking, he wore, with trepidation at first, his cape, a shiny blue satin, a shade lighter than navy, with a comforting lining of red lamb's wool and a gold-plated clasp in the shape of a talon. He thought people would stare, if not laugh, but he had underestimated the commonplace bizarrerie of Manhattan street theater, the love-starved throngs, the poignant chorus of vain attention-getting. Hair dyed pastel colors, see-through blouses, lovely young shoulders blotched by tattoos, chalk white black-lipped vampire makeup, the determinedly in-your-face costumes of the proclaimedly gay, the secret oddities of psychopathia sexualis turned inside out and put on show like the convolute inviting forms of flowers. The crowd of such denied Bech a single sideways glance at his cape as it swirled dramatically around him. Their eyes went to Robin, the candid purity of her face, boyish in its fashionable short haircut, formal like a waxen seal set on the untold pleasures of her body, curvaceous in its mauve catsuit. To go with his cape, Bech affected stovepipe trousers and narrow black slipper-like shoes with rippled rubber treads. In these shoes he moved stealthily across pavements, lightly climbed stairs to bright gatherings, gallery openings, poetry readings, of tufted young aspirants to artistic fame who were startled to see that he, who had haunted, for a truncated page or two, their laborious double-columned high school readers, was still alive. He slit his eyes against the glaze of their whiny sweat and shuttling banter. He lifted his nose to scent evil and detected only the sour aroma of an illiterate innocence. These pretty children did not read, not in the old impassioned, repressed way, scouring print for forbidden knowledge, as his generation had done. Nietzsche, Marx, Freud, Joyce, the great god-killers. His enemies breathed his own air and lurked in dark lairs. His slippers carried him one night up the fire escape of a 4-story red brick building on Christopher Street, and the slant reaches, jungle-like with ailanthus, of the West Village. Robin in her mask followed him up across the rusty iron slats. Tall old sash windows revealed roach-ridden kitchens and book-lined walls crawling with the wires of outmoded stereo sets. Noises could be heard through these windows, cries of emotion and laughter, whether in reality or on television, was not perfectly clear. Bech climbed on, up the spindly metal, welded by workmen long dead, toward a 4th-floor apartment where 30 years ago he had been a guest. He had been in his 40s, his host in his 50s. The fire escape slats threw a diagonal comb of shadow across the bricks. One landing, seen downward through another, made a shimmering pattern, located, like the elusive effects of op art, in no particular space. The 4th-floor window panes were black, but held oily orange traces of a reading lamp dimly burning several rooms away. Bech tested the sash, but it was shut. The loathsome bookworm inside had barricaded himself against the warm October night, its cries of human intercourse, its garbagey smells of life. From beneath his cape, Bech whipped out a strip of duct tape, attached it to a lower pane of the upper sash, deftly struck it with the blunt end of a glinting burglary tool. The muffled sound of fracture suggested that of a single ripe fruit falling. Swiftly his gray-gloved hand was in, twisting the worn window lock, and the weathered sash eased up on its rotten cords. He slithered over the sill, Robin as close behind him as a shadow. Inadvertently, her hand on the sill caught his trailing cape. With a silent, predatory gesture, the silhouetted avenger tugged the lined satin free. They were in a kind of pantry. Shelves designed for pans and crockery were filled with books. A lot of them bound galleys for review, stashed sideways and too deep, yellowing, generating dust. Stealthily, the intruders passed through an exiguous kitchen, scrubbed and bare, as a daytime caretaker would leave it. 3 apples in a wooden bowl were the only visible food. Judgment of Paris, Venus the winner, trouble in Troy. The apples imparted to Bech's nostrils the faint tang of orchards gone under to malls. Then came a small dining room, its walls hung with spidery engravings of what seemed conferences, men in white wigs and black knickers plotting revolutions. They were making sweeping gestures. Kill the king! Écrasez l'infâme! Make it new! A half-open door led to a small bedroom. A single bed made up taut as a hospital bed, with a number of upright pillows, sleeping upright, buried alive. Bech's own breath empathetically grew short. The sallow light, dimly perceived from the fire escape, strengthened. Bech and Robin found themselves in a room lined with books piled to the ceiling, disorder upon order, uniform sets submerged under late arrivals, biographies and commentaries and posthumous volumes. The original organization overwhelmed, torn bookmarks and off-prints chaotically interleaved. An arid smell, as of man-made desert, seeped from so much paper. Dust mites, spilling allergens, rustled underfoot. Beyond this room, glimpsed through a doorway carved through the Egyptian thickness of books, an underfurnished living room bared itself to the street light, to the scattered glimmer of lower Manhattan and the sullen gap of the Hudson. Nobody was there. The occupant of this village apartment, the mastermind behind its parched accumulations, sat behind the intruders in a corner of the library, reading and sniffing oxygen. A baby blue plastic tube led from a cylindrical tank beside his armchair up to his nose, where it forked to take in both nostrils. The man had advanced emphysema from a lifetime of contented smoking while he read. A gooseneck lamp looked over his shoulder. His black stockinged feet were up on an old-fashioned ottoman, with tassels and rolled seams, and a top of multicolored leather sliced like a pie. His body, boneless and amorphous, boneless presence merged with that of his creased leather armchair, tucked like a kind of shroud around him. Time had nearly ceased to flow here. Nothing moved but the invalid's silky, flat-ended fingers as he turned a page. He looked up, blinking, resenting the interruption of his reading. "Bech," he said at last. "My God! Climbing fire escapes now. Why the crazy get-up? I thought you were a madman breaking in." "Get real, Cohen," Bech snapped. "Capes are coming back. They are back. Monocle's next." "Or a dope addict." The invalid wheezily continued in gasps. "I get about 1 a week. They diss me because there's nothing to steal, just old books. Kids today have no idea of the value of books. And who's your lovely sidekick? Zaftig, I can see, even through the catsuit, but so young to get mixed up in old men's quarrels." Cohn had taken off his reading glasses to focus on the incursion from beyond the printed page. His eyes shriveled and sank in folds of collapsing lids and puckered socket skin. Seeing that Bech would not perform introductions, he said, in a mockery of politeness, "I almost liked your last book, the one about the Korean War orphan. At least you weren't trying to pass off your feeble fantasies as any country we know." He had barely the breath to blow out a candle. His utterances resembled sentences lifted from book reviews and peppered with ellipses to make them more favorable. His reference was to Going South, 1992, a tender, well-researched novella imagining the adventures of a parentless 9-year-old girl, Hang Kim, from a village near Huichan, caught up in the routed American armies retreating from the waves of Chinese troops all the way to Taejan. As Bech aged, his thoughts turned to war. He had fought in one over half a century ago. At the time, and for most of the time since, he had thought of war as an aberration, a dehumanizing episode to be gotten through and forgotten. But lately he had begun to wonder if Hemingway and Tolstoy weren't right. War was truth, in an unbearably pure state. It has shaped the map and spawned the most vigorous moral principle, that of tribal loyalty. Bech swirled his cape, performing with an ironic bow the courtesies Cohen had requested. Rachel, meet my nemesis, the arch-fiend of American criticism, Mr. Orlando Cohen. Orlando, this is Ms. Rachel Teagarten, who helps me out in my work. She understands computers, copulation, and elementary cooking.
I suppose computers,
the old magus wheezed,
are worth understanding. I always think in this connection of the chess-playing automaton who turned out to be a dwarf. The board had to be transparent so he could follow the moves. Imagine following the moves upside down, crouched in a little airless box, and winning sometimes. He didn't always win, actually. That is a myth. There was a series of dwarfs, some of whom were undoubtedly more skillful than others.
This long speech left Cohen utterly breathless. He inhaled prolongedly through his nose. His nose and ears had enlarged with age, or had remained the same while the rest of him shrunk. He had been a handsome man once, and women had been tantalized and maddened by their failure to distract him from his chaste ambition to be the ultimate adjudicator of literature. All literature, but specializing in American. He had steadfastly refused to grant Bech a place, even a minor place, in the canon. In review after review, he had found Bech's books artificial, hollow, dandyish, lame. His review of Going South in the New Criterion had been jeeringly titled, Halt and Lame. Don't try to buy time with gabble, Bech advised him. The jig is up.
What jig?
Cohen managed to get out. The tip of his nose looked blue with anoxia. He had a strange contemplative habit of twitching his nose, of swinging its tip from side to side, rapidly. The jig of trashing me. What did I ever do to you?
You failed to write well.
How could that be? It was all I cared about, writing well.
You cared too much about it. You let the words hold you back from descending into yourself. You were Jewish and tried to pretend you were American.
Can't you be both?
Bellow can. Salinger could, once. Mailer, alternately. Never both at once. Malamud? I don't know. He lost me in those last books. Dubin's Lives and the one about the monkeys. He wanted credentials. Jews can't get credentials, not in a world run by Goyim. Israel is a credential. It's not a good one. The Arabs won't stamp it.
You're stalling, Orlando. See this? What is it? Bech delved beneath his beautiful capacious cape and brandished the steel tool he came up with. It felt heavy, heavier than it looked.
A gun,
Orlando Cohen said. His silky fingers adjusted the plastic leech whispering into his nostrils. A gat, Bech corrected. A rod with a silencer. Not even the people downstairs are going to hear when I plug you. They'll think it's your dishwasher kicking into the next part of the cycle. The sick man's eyes left Bech's face.
Rachel,
he said.
How long has he been like this?
Don't answer the scumbag, Bech commanded her. The prick. He sucks up to wasps. The stiff-necked old establishment. The more anti-Semitic they were, the Jameses, the Adamses, the Holmeses, the more he loves them. Hemingway, Fitzgerald. Never mind their snide cracks. He even praised Capote, can you imagine? Praised Capote and panned me. Cohen replied, so faintly the duo had to strain to listen, picking up all sorts of muttered street noise and radio music in the process.
Capote descended into himself. In cold blood, he hit his vein. He wanted to be hung with Perry. He hated himself, the little squeaky monster he was. He worked his self-hatred into an objective correlative. He made us care. Bech, you missed your vein. You were squeamish and essentially lazy. You missed the boat. The boat. To America.
I am going to shut you up, Bech told him. I am going to squeeze this fucking trigger and rub you out. Don't think I'm too squeamish. I've killed before. In the war. There was no knowing how many. With a Browning automatic rifle, you poured lead into a thicket or Belgian farm shed that had been sheltering enemy fire, or took on a flak wagon or machine gun emplacement, and at the end there was no telling how many of the bodies were yours. These German bodies that after a few freezing days in their piles looked like cordwood or enormous purple and green vegetables. In the Ardennes, in December of 44, in the 28th Infantry, in the bitter cold, the German soldiers were specks in the snow, distant, running toward him or away from him. Wasn't easy to tell in the snow glare. You squeezed the icy trigger of the M1. Metal so cold the oil would freeze and jam the bolt. You squinted into the glare and squeezed through the crumbling GI gloves, whose fraying olive threads grew little balls of frozen snow, cold to the bones from the night in the wet foxhole, huddled with O'Malley and Pereira and Lundgren, the loved strangers whose bodies were life's warmth, up to your knees in icy water in the trench, the physical misery great enough and so incessant you could get light-hearted about the death that might hide behind the next tree as you scuttled along, hump-backed with your pack. Thick ancient beeches the trees were, their gray lines rounded and graceful like those of women in the snow. Country like a Christmas card, great kraut-killing country, the men joked, the bleary, heartless boy men. And it was true. The Ardennes counteroffensive brought the Heinees up out of their bunkered, kraut-trim emplacements into the open upright, trying to advance under Hitler's mad orders. You squeezed, and the distant scurrying dot dropped, and you felt a spurt of warmth inside, a surcease in the misery, a leak of satisfaction and pride from some other, impossible world, a world at peace. He potted a few more, like ducks against a white sky, before the platoon fell back and he got his feet out of ice water. If he had killed for his country, he could kill for his art.
Go ahead,
Cohen breathlessly urged him.
Pull it. Do it. I'm 82 and can't take 5 steps without suffocating. Do me the favor.
Yet the old creep didn't mean it. He was cunning. He was crazy to live. Cannily, Cohen went on.
What about your young friend here, Rachel? Think she'll like the rest of her days in the pen? They electrocute women now. Seems a heavy price to pay for your elderly boyfriend's vanity.
She chose to come along. I didn't drag her. I love seeing Henry so energized, Robin told Cohen.
He should have put his energy into his work. Travel light. Think big. Stunts. You can't believe a word. I ignored The Chosen because everybody agreed it was an embarrassment.
Not Charles Poor in the Daily Times. He loved it.
Poor? That old lady. What did he know? You tried to con us. You thought you could skip out of yourself and write American. Bech, let me ask you, can you say the Lord's Prayer?
Bech didn't dignify his inquisitor with an answer, just laid the revolver, a Luger, a war souvenir lifted from the body of a dead officer, a gun that may well have killed Jews before. A little off from pointing at his enemy's heart, he laid it sideways in air, giving Cohen's struggling, insatiable tongue permission to continue.
Well, 90% of the Americans around you can. It's in their heads. They can rattle the damn thing right off. How can you expect to write about people when you don't have a clue to the crap that's in their heads? The Holy Ghost. These Goyim came here thinking the Holy Ghost had them by the hand. The Holy Ghost. Who the hell is that? Some pigeon, that's all. Anybody knows? Those first winters, they'd never seen anything like it back in England. They stuck it out about that god-awful faith, Bech, when it burns out. It leaves a dead spot. Love it or leave it. A dead spot. That's where America is, in that dead spot. Emily, that guy in the woods, Mel, Haw, they were there. No and thunder, the big no. Jews don't know how to say no. All we know is yes. Yes, I'll kill Isaac. Yes, let's wrestle. That's why you're lousy, Bech. You gave it a shot. Some say a good shot. But not me. For me, it fell flat. You aimed away from the subject you had into the one no one has. except the people who can inhabit nowhere. America. Opportunity. Jazz. Okay. But it's a nowhere. A coast-to-coast nowhere. You thought, like those Hollywood Meshuggahs, Jews so happy to get out of the ghetto, you could tickle it into becoming a place with cute people. Mickey Rooney, Louis Stone, Jesus, James, Twain, Adams, those mean old boys. You got to love them. You, Beck, I don't have to love. You are a phony. You made yourself up. Worse even than Capote. You're a con man, a ganef. Go ahead. Pull it. I'm dying for it. No kidding. I can't breathe, can't talk, can't fuck, can't eat. Can't even sleep more than an hour at a time. Pull it. Look the other way, Rachel. Death's not as pretty as you kids these days seem to think. You think it's nothing, but it's still something.
The revered critic's nose twitched, its blue tip swinging back and forth for perhaps the last time. Beck uncertainly glanced sideways at Robin. He admired in her profile the emphatic black eyebrow, a bold face hyphen, stark and Mediterranean in feeling. If Iphigenia and Esther, Electra and Delilah had possessed such fatal unflinching eyebrows. If he wanted to shoot, she would watch him shoot. She was the best sidekick a man could have. Robin, he told her, go pull the tube out of the slime ball's nostrils. She quickly did as she was told, padding forward in her catsuit, thinking perhaps this was a preliminary courtesy when one old man killed another after decades of enmity. Beck explained, lowering the gun. Let's see if he can breathe on his own. Cohen had steeled himself, but panic was creeping up from his lungs to his face. The tip of his nose was revolving in continuous motion, tracing a tiny circle. He strained forward to unpinch his lungs and scrabbled at the side of his chair for the whispering baby blue tube. His words were mere husks in clumps of 2 or 3.
Not like this. Use the gat. Beck, believe me, your stuff won't last. It's upper, middle brow, trash, not even upper, middle.
You fetid bag of half-baked opinions, Beck snarled. You rotten spoiler. You've been stealing my oxygen for years.
Your stuff, it's...
Cohen had slumped sideways in the chair. The book he had left on the arm, Walter Benjamin, Selected Writings, Volume 1, 1913 to 1926, hit the floor with a thud. His complexion approached the tint of a fish, his throat puffing like stifled gills.
50s,
he concluded with a triumphant leer.
Your 50s!
His yellow eyeballs rolled upward and his reading glasses flopped into his lap. Let's blow this joint, Beck told Robin. I smell escaping gas. But he knew what she meant. If he wasn't going to shoot him, wasn't it cruel to let him asphyxiate? Or was this rough justice on the anoxic literary heights? Listen, doll, we're doing him a favor just like he asked. Poor sap is addicted. Nobody likes air after they've tasted pure oxygen. How does he breathe when he goes to the John, when he grabs his hour of sleep? Between us, I bet he socks in a solid 7-8 hours a night with maybe one trip to the hopper to take a piss. Orlando Cohen, fabled maker and destroyer of reputations, lay crumpled in his chair like a baby transfixed in the mystery of crib death. Robin suppressed a cry and a step toward the unconscious dotard. Beck's steely gray-gloved hand on her arm restrained her impulsive motion. Don't let that dickhead manipulate you, he told his companion. You're like any broad. You're too soft. A cold-hearted knocker like that, he takes advantage. He'll get it together as soon as he hears us out the window and down the fire escape. Did you dig that canned lecture on American Lit? He's given it 1,000 times. Off in the city, the police siren began to ululate. Not for them this time, but perhaps the next. Clatteringly, the duo descended into the weedy, dark back garden, where the shadow of ailanthus leaves restlessly stabbed. Robin brushed up against Beck in these shadows, her face startlingly white without its mask. I want a baby, she said softly. Hey, Beck said, I said broads were soft-hearted. I didn't say they had to act on it. I want to bear your child, she insisted. I'm 74, he said. I'm past my sell-by date. They made their stealthy way out, past overflowing trash cans and dying rose bushes, onto Christopher Street, where they became, in the early evening lamplight, another discreetly quarreling couple. I felt scared, Robin confessed, when I thought you were going to shoot that wheezy old man. I should have shot the putz, Bech responded morosely. He's done me a world of woe. He's tried to negate me. Why didn't you shoot him? Her hand tugged on his arm like another question there under the cape, which lifted a little behind them as a breeze from Bleecker Street conveyed an ozone suggestion of a thunderstorm before midnight. I believed him, that it was worse for him to live. You know what I think? She waited, irritating Bech for the 1,000th time, with the playful, self-pleasuring expertise with which women played the human game. What? He had to respond gruffly. I think, she said, you're a bit soft-hearted yourself. I was, he allowed, but they beat it out of me. They nagged and nitpicked and small-minded me out of it. They couldn't, she said. They're just critics, but you. Once again, her artful pause forced him to make a response. Yes? You're you. And who isn't? Everybody is, but few take it as much to heart as you have, Henry. What? Cut it out with the dialogue. Do you think maybe we've rid the world of enough evil for now? There's plenty left. There's a guy who teaches at Columbia, Carlos something era, an English professor, or whatever they call it now, who really got my goat in the book review the other week. He said I lacked duende. Duende. I looked it up in the Spanish dictionary and it said ghost, goblin, fairy. And then there's Gore Vidal, and Gary Wills, Darling, what now? You're sputtering. Let's think about our baby. I can't bring a baby into a world as polluted by wicked criticism as this one. Nobody criticizes a baby. They would any of mine, Robin. We were just getting going as a duo. Were? I want to wreak more vengeance. No, you don't, Robin told him. What a duo wants is to become a trio. Here's the deal. Knock me up or I go to the cops, the bulls. And tell them what? Everything. This is blackmail. I'd call it devotion to your best interests. They turned right on Bedford to cut through to Houston to walk onto Crosby. The city hung around them like an agitprop backdrop, murmurous and surreal, perforated by lights and lives in the millions. A bat-colored cloud bank gathered in the east, trailing wisps above the saffron dome of the city's glow. Rachel Teagarten snuggled closer, complacently, under his cape. Bech wondered if this little tootsie wasn't getting to be a bit of a drag. Bech and the Bounty of Sweden. A storm of protest greeted the announcement that Henry Bech had won the 1999 Nobel Prize for Literature. Fumed the New York Times editorial. The Swedish Academy's penchant for colorful non-entities and anti-establishment gadflies as recipients of its dynamite-based bounty has surpassed mere caprice and taken on, in this latest election, dimensions of wantonness. If the time for an American winner had at last come round again, then a deliberate affront must be read in this bypassing of solid contenders like Mailer, Roth, and Ozick, not to mention Pynchon and DeLillo, in favor of this passé exponent of fancy penmanship, whose skimpy offhand oeuvre fails even to achieve J.D. Salinger's majestic, total abstention from publication. The Post quoted Isaiah Thornbush as saying, "With all respect to my dear colleague and old friend Henry, this turns the prize into a prank." I was, quite frankly, stunned. "Bech? Who dat?" was the Daily News' front-page headline. And People ran as its cover the least flattering photo they could find on file, showing Bech and his then-wife Bea in bib overalls feigning repairs to the grape arbor of their mock-Tudor, mock-Edenic residence in Ossining. New York rose to the occasion with a languidly acid John Simon retrospective entitled The Case, Far-Fetched, for Henry Bech. Meanwhile, the phone in his Crosby Street loft kept ringing. sometimes interrupting the septuagenarian winner in the midst of changing diapers for his 8-month-old baby, Golda. When it came to naming her daughter, Robin Teagarten was not so post-Jewish after all, so that the spicy smell of ochre baby shit and the shrilling of the phone became the two wings of one exasperating experience. Golda was sturdy and teething and had her mother's challenging calm stare, not fox-colored thus far, but an infant's contemplative, unblinking slate blue. She was old enough to think there was something fishy about this knobby-handed old man, groping about in her crotch and bottom crack with chilly baby wipes, and then too firmly pressing the adhesive fasteners in place upon her glossy, wobbly belly. Golda would tease him and show off her strength by twisting on the changing towel, corkscrewing like a Baroque puto. She preferred her mother's cool, quick touch, or the light brown hands of Leontine, the lilting au pair from Antigua, by way of Bensonhurst. The voice on the phone was usually that of Mary Jo Zwengler, Vellum Press's leather-clad chief of publicity. "But I don't want to go on Oprah," he would tell her. "I hate that hooting audience of corn-belt feminists she has." Mary Jo would sigh, "It's expected, Henry. It would be considered an insult to 2/3 of America if you don't deign to appear." "Yeah, the illiterate 2/3. Where were they when Going South sold less than 20,000 copies?" Mary Jo was stagely patient with him. "You're a laureate now, Henry. You're not free to pull that Henry Bech reclusive, don't bother me, I'm having a writer's block act." "Bech? Who dat?" he quoted. "Nobody's asking that anymore. You're hot, Henry. I'm sorry, but the spike in sales should put your little girl through college if you help nurse it along. We're thinking of even bringing When the Saints back into print." "Why did you let it go out of print?" "Don't be difficult, Henry. Warehousing costs have been skyrocketing. We have a big overhead in our new quarters." Mary Jo's annual salary, he estimated, would loom above a year's worth of his royalties like a sequoia above a bonsai cherry tree. "Did I ask you," he asked her, "to build yourselves a skyscraper just because McGraw-Hill had one?" "Hun, please be an angel and stop giving me a hard time," Mary said. He imagined he could hear the squeak of leather and the click of studs on metal as she shifted her heft in her personally molded swivel chair. "You were wonderful on Charlie Rose." "Charlie was wonderful," Bech protested. "I hardly said a word." The interviewer's long face, tinted the color of a salmon, loomed in memory. Rose had leaned forward ominously close, like an Avedon portrait of himself, and urged, "Tell me honestly, Henry, aren't you embarrassed to have won this prize when so many other writers haven't?" And the culture purveyor's eyes protruded toward him inquisitorially, so that he resembled Dick Van Dyke in Disney animation. These professional personalities operated at an energy level that stretched Beck's brain like chewing gum on the shoe of a man trying to walk away. Terry Gross, in her beguilingly adolescent and faintly stammery voice, had put it to him more brutally yet. "How can you explain it? It must feel like a weird sort of miracle, I mean, when Henry James and Theodore Dreiser and Robert Frost and Nabokov didn't." "I'm not a Swedish mind reader," was all Beck could manage by way of apology. "I'm not even a Swedish mind." This seemed to him a pretty good quip, which he had prepared in the reveries of insomnia, but which, on its occasion for utterance, lacked the lilt of spontaneity. The short-haired interviewer's giggle was perfunctory. And then, like a dingo worrying the throat of a lamed kangaroo, she went back to the attack. "No, but seriously." This was on a radio swing down through Megalopolis, from Christopher Lydon in a dismal stretch beyond Boston University, to Leonard Lopate in the dingy corridors of New York City Hall, to Philadelphia's fresh air in a canister-lined chamber of WHYY, and on to Diane Ream's WAMU Airy on Brandywine Street, in the bosky midst of American University in Washington, D.C. She had fascinatingly blued hair and a crystalline beckoning voice, as if from another room she were calling some sorority girls to dinner, and in this particular chain of interviewers put Bech least on the defensive. "Why, of course," she seemed to be saying, "Mr. Bech has won the Nobel Prize for Literature. Who better? Listeners, you tell us." The very first caller in, whose sugary southern accent buzzed in Bech's earphones like tinnitus, wanted to know if it was true, as she had read in the National Enquirer, that Mr. Bech had recently fathered a baby out of a young lady a third of his age. "I suppose it's not untrue," Bech grudged into the microphone. Robin had blackmailed him into it. He resisted explaining. It was become a father or an accused murderer. "My question is, sir, do you think that such behavior is fair to either the young lady or that helpless baby when, begging your pardon, you might drop dead any time?" Fair? It was a concept he hadn't encountered lately. As a child, he would protest to his playmates that something wasn't fair. But as the inexorable decades had washed over him, his indignation had been slowly leached away. "And that $1 million you've gone and won, do you intend to do any good with it?" He had repeatedly explained to interviewers and crasser talk show hosts that by the time his taxes were paid to the state, city, and nation, it wouldn't be anything like $1 million. It would be less than $500,000. Counting the hours of his time and ergs of his energy the prize had taken, and the universal consensus that he now owed the world something, he had come to figure it as a net financial loss. And anyway, what does $500,000 get you in New York City these days? A Jeff Koons statuette? Or a closet in a Fifth Avenue co-op? He began to explain all this, but the caller, who had come to inhabit Bech's head like an incurable parasite, steadily maintained her investigative line. "And is it true, sir, as I have read in several reputable sources, that while traveling in the communist world under the sponsorship of our U.S. government, you did enjoy a liaison with a certain famous Bulgarian poet and had a child by that lady whom you have never officially acknowledged? A child brought up under strict communist doctrines until he was a grown man, never knowing who his father was, while you enjoyed a capitalist lifestyle?" The strange images and lies were coming so fast and so winsomely, he could scarcely speak, though he had been speaking steadily since the prize had been announced. His mouth opened, 2 inches from the sponge-muffled mic, like a miniature boxing glove or a fist in a Keith Haring silhouette, but only a scraping noise emerged. Hating even a half-second of dead air, Diane Rehm melodiously enunciated, "Perhaps our guest does not care to answer." The voice in Bech's head burrowed deeper, working its jaws faster and showing a rough underbelly of Christian resentment. "Well, now, Diane, if this man doesn't care to answer, what's he doing sitting on your show? If he's just gone to clam up, maybe he should not have accepted the prize." "I have never been a father before," Bech brought out, "just like I have never won the Nobel Prize before." "Well, if you've never been a father before," the voice said, "from all that I've read, you should be teaching those black teenagers birth control." "Thank you for your call, Maureen," Diane Rehm said firmly and pressed a switch that eliminated Maureen from the airways. "Next," she announced to the nation, "Betty Jean from Greensboro, North Carolina." But Betty Jean was no better. She said, "Speaking of black teenagers, I don't think all you celebrities having babies out of wedlock is setting any kind of example now, is it?" But Bech said, at bay, "I wasn't a celebrity until I won the prize. I was just a writer, off in a corner. Anyway, I'd be delighted to marry the mother of my child, but she's still mulling my offer over. She's very modern." "If you ask me," said Betty Jean in the instant before her electronic execution, "all you Yankees are too damn modern." Bech in his heart agreed. Moral insufficiency. Lying awake in his loft, while Rothko-esque rectangles of incidental city light vibrated around him on the walls, he listened for his baby to peep and reflected back upon his life and work, his daily, ever briefer earthly existence. A few countries, a few women. There were many countries he would never visit, some even now being born, younger than Golda, from the wrecks of shabby old empires. The women, he supposed they had been the point of it all, the biologically ordained goal of his existence, shining and looming and then receding. They had been sufficient in number. He could not keep count or recall all their names, though he could always get at least a face, a glimmer of pallor in a darkened room, an uncertain, fetching smile and eye-pits of warm, wild shadow. Still, it had been a frightfully curtailed minority of all the appropriate aged women that had been available globally. Likewise, His works, the 7 volumes, not counting the British anthology, The Best of Bech, long out of print, seemed remarkably few, considering the possibilities, and as mysteriously contingent as the major turnings of his life. 7 stages, 7 branches on the menorah, 7 white keys on the piano. He had never quite understood why the black keys, the half tones, had those 2 gaps within an octave. It enabled a pianist to find his way, he supposed. Bech's 7 books glimmered in his backward glance like fading trail marks in a dark wood, una selva oscura, the tangled place where his consciousness intersected with the universe. He rarely looked into their pale pages. His book seemed to have so perilous a connection with the giant truth of the matter. His arbitrary identity arisen, like the universe, out of darkness and silence. First, the slimy preconscious miracle, in velvety uterine darkness, of repeated prenatal mitosis, keyed to viable complexity by unfathomable signals among the chromosomes and proteins. Then, the harsh eruption into the icy hospital light and the fragrant, noisy Freudian triangle, with its oppressive yet nurturing atmospheres of kitchen, bedroom, and bathroom. Then, the long monitored stairways of schooling, class after class, teacher after teacher, and his abrupt graduation, in the year of Pearl Harbor, into war, and the inconclusive trials of adulthood, of which his present sardonic, prize-bothered decrepitude was the latest, if not quite the last. And one man in his time plays many parts, his acts being 7 ages. Golda whimpered in her crib, which they had placed just outside their flimsily partitioned-off bedroom. In the day, they moved her crib into its shelter of 2x4s and wallboard, a box within the loft, a kind of jewel box when Golda was napping within it. Robin would be off at Computer Crossroads on 3rd Avenue. Bech would scribble softly, writing and scratching out, while Leontine tiptoed through the breakfast dishes in the laundry. 2 adults, he marveled, held in thrall by 18 pounds of guileless ego. When baby awoke, the cocoa-colored au pair, cooing in Caribbean, would feed her fragments of toast and chicken, gleefully chewed though Golda still had fewer teeth than fingers. What teeth she had were big and hard-earned, having given her much grief pushing up through the gums. Then a bottle was administered on the sofa, Golda blindly sucking away, while Leontine's eyes lapped up Days of Our Lives.